The Visitor from Hell. The first apocalypse took place in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Northern Virginia. It was caused by a 5-year-old girl named Sarah Rogers, an unassuming student just starting her first year of kindergarten. She also happened to be my daughter. The first domino to fall was because of a woman named Miss Erickson. Miss Erickson was Sarah's homeroom teacher, a lonely, middle-aged woman who harbored enduring obsessions with two things: the army of stray cats that besieged her home year-round, and the Christmas season. Because of the latter obsession, Miss Erickson decided that she would begin her Christmas lessons a little early that year, in mid-September. The first lesson involved students writing letters to Santa Claus. Harmless, right? Well, I certainly thought so at first. But as Miss Erickson's enthusiasm for teaching has never quite matched her enthusiasm for cats and candy cane-flavored liquor, the students' letters got sent out with some spelling errors. As far as I can tell, though, my daughter is the only one who sent her letter out to Satan. That shouldn't have been a problem. Just another funny anecdote to add to the highlight reel of stories that make up any normal childhood. The problem was that we got a letter back. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, and I was drifting off to sleep in my recliner when I was startled from my reverie by an urgent knock at the door. I pushed myself out of the chair to go see who was there and what they could have possibly needed that was so important. Yet when I opened the door, I was greeted only by an empty porch. I leaned out and scanned the street. The sky was blue and cloudless, and the neighborhood was uncharacteristically quiet for the time of day. Usually on a Sunday afternoon, there would be kids chasing each other around, or perhaps working on their car. At the very least, Miss Mickelhattie would be out walking her dog to let it relieve itself on her least favorite neighbor's lawns. Yet the street was still and silent. I glanced down at my doormat and saw a charcoal black envelope. I bent down and picked it up, staring at it as I carried it inside my home. The envelope was cartoonishly large and smelled faintly of sulfur. Sarah, my daughter's name, was written on the front in blood-red ink. My first instinct was to wonder what kind of person would hand-deliver a letter to a 5-year-old girl. Turning the envelope over, I slid my thumb under the seal and tore it open. I pulled the letter inside out with care. It looked to be at least 100 years old and seemed like it might crumble in my hands at any moment. The penmanship was loopy cursive, written with the same blood-red ink that was on the envelope. I felt a growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach as I read the letter, the contents of which I will replicate for you here. Dear Sarah, thank you so much for your letter. Almost nobody takes the time to write to me anymore. I usually only get letters from Satanists, and they are an awfully strange group of people. I have carefully considered your request for a life-size living teddy bear, and I believe that our scientists down here in hell have been able to put together a reasonable approximation of your request. Frank and Teddy is scheduled to arrive at your doorstep shortly after you receive this letter. Yours truly, Satan. I must have looked rather stupid as I stood there staring at the letter in my hands, my mouth hanging open as I tried to put my thoughts in order. Yet I wager I looked even stupider when I turned around to see a 7-foot-tall teddy bear standing behind me, and I screamed like a little girl. Frank and Teddy seemed unfazed by my reaction, and judging by his appearance, I'd guessed that he was used to such a reception. He had matted brown fur that was patched together with various bits of ragged cloth, and covered in what looked suspiciously like bloodstains. One of his eyes was a little black button, and the other one looked like a glowing ember set somewhere deep in the back of his head. He spoke in a booming, monotonous baritone that made me wonder if his vocal cords had been singed by hellfire. I am Frank and Teddy, he bellowed. I am here to love you. I tried to force my mouth to form words, but all that came out was a small, squeaking noise. Are you Sarah? Frank-N-Teddy bellowed. No, I'm Sarah's dad, I replied. Listen, I really don't think that. Where is Sarah? Interrupted Frank-N-Teddy. Well, she's at school right now, and then I will go to school so that I may love her. Wait a second. Well, school's over now, and she'll be home any moment, but you can't. Then I shall wait here, Frank-N-Teddy finished. He promptly turned around and made his way to my couch. The couch groaned and sagged under his enormous weight. He turned towards me. Do you have any souls of the damned? He bellowed. I must consume the souls of the damned to sustain myself. No, I replied. I'm afraid we don't. He made a vague grumbling noise in his throat and said, Cheetos are also fine. Oh, well, we do have those. I'll help myself. I looked back down at the letter as Frank-N-Teddy wandered into my kitchen and saw that there was a customer service number written on the back. I got on my phone to call it, but before I finished dialing, I heard a scream sound out from behind me. I turned around to Sarah standing in the doorway, mouth hanging open as she stared at Frank-N-Teddy, rummaging through our cabinets and throwing things on the floor in search of his Cheetos. Sarah, honey, don't be scared, I said, trying to take my own advice. But Sarah wasn't scared at all. She shot past me like a bolt of little blonde lightning and leapt onto Frank-N-Teddy's leg, wrapping herself so tightly around it that she was lifted off the ground whenever he took a step. He's perfect, Daddy, she screamed. I can't wait to take him to show and tell. I was flabbergasted. Wait, really? I sputtered. Of course, Sarah squealed. Oh, I said. But you can't bring a monster teddy bear to... Are you Sarah? Frank-N-Teddy's booming voice cut me off yet again. Yes, Sarah shouted. Frank-N-Teddy took a knee. My lady, he bellowed. I have been enlisted by the Dark Lord Satan to serve at your pleasure. I shall love and protect you with my life and inflict the horrors of a demonic legion on your enemies. Cool, Sarah shouted. She leapt to her feet and began hopping around Frank-N-Teddy in circles. Not knowing what else to do, I finished typing the customer service number into my phone with shaking hands. The line rang once, and then a tired female voice answered. Hell customer service. How may I help you today? Listen, wait. Did you just say, how may I help you? The voice on the other end sighed. It's not my joke. It's just something management forces us to say. Okay, listen, I think there's been some sort of mistake. The woman sighed again. All heaven and hell placements are final. The appeals process is really more of a formality. What? No, I'm talking about the 7-foot-tall monster teddy bear that just showed up in my home. Oh, the woman said, her tone relaxing a bit. You must be the Rogers household. Yeah, that's right. Satan wanted to let you know that he hopes your daughter enjoys the gift. He regrets to inform you, however, that he will be out of the office until next Wednesday, so he won't be able to check back with you until then. I turned and watched Frank-N-Teddy open a family-sized bag of Cheetos and dump its entire contents into his mouth. Several handfuls fell onto the floor, and Sarah trampled them into dust as she hopped around in excitement. Well, can I maybe return him until then? I asked. No. So I'm stuck with a giant monster teddy bear until Satan calls me next week? No, of course not, the woman said. Oh, thank God, I replied, somewhat regretting my phrasing. Satan won't be calling you. He has you scheduled for a face-to-face. My throat tightened up and my mouth went dry. I tried to tell her that wasn't necessary, but all I could get out was a few croaking sounds. She muttered something about rude humans and hung up the phone with a decisive click. I turned back around to see Sarah screaming with laughter as Frank and Teddy tossed her up in the air and caught her over and over again. Her hair had fallen over her face, and her bright blue eyes shone like little aquamarines. I couldn't help but smile a little despite myself. The smile disappeared, however, when I began to think about how I was going to keep a 7-foot-tall teddy bear hidden from the rest of the neighborhood. And that was a relatively small problem compared to deciding what to do when Satan himself showed up on my doorstep. Yet as I watched Frank and Teddy tear apart my kitchen, the most pressing issue became clear. I was going to have to buy more Cheetos. A demonic sleepover. My nerves were fried. My hand shook as I set down the empty coffee cup, my fourth one of the night. Frank and Teddy and Sarah sat with their legs splayed out on the living room floor, working on a coloring book. It was 2 a.m. I had tried calling the customer service line over and over again the previous day, only to be put on hold, hung up on, and eventually transferred to a place called the Department of Motor Vehicles and Purgatory Assignations. Finally, I gave up, but I promised myself I would not sleep until I could reach him, and resolved to try again the next morning. For now, all I could do was watch Sarah and Frank and Teddy color. I cleared my throat to get their attention. They didn't even look up. Ahem, I said more loudly. Nothing. I pushed my tired body off the sofa and walked over to the two of them, tapping Frank and Teddy on the shoulder. "When do you think you might want to go to sleep?" I asked. "Sleep?" said Frank and Teddy, his face a question mark. "You know, that thing where you close your eyes and lay still for about 8 hours?" His face registered no recognition. My eyes strayed to the coloring book, where Cinderella's dress had been filled in with a deep purple crayon, with almost as much color outside the lines as in. She'd also been given a pair of large red horns. "Sarah," I said, "I thought you could color all inside the lines now." Sarah's face broke into a grin. "That was Frank and Teddy," she said. "He's terrible." "These crayons are too small," protested Frank and Teddy, "and they taste like wax." "You're not supposed to eat them," Sarah giggled. Frank and Teddy shrugged his huge shoulders and began clumsy work on a black, spiky tail that poked out of the back of Cinderella's dress. "Even if you don't need sleep," I said, "Sarah does, and she's got school tomorrow morning." "I'm too excited to go to sleep, Daddy," protested Sarah. "That may be, but even so, you're gonna put on your pajamas, lay in bed, and try." "At least let us finish Cinderella first, then I'll go to bed, I promise." "All the spaces have already been colored in." "Frank and Teddy says she's not done until she has her other 8 arms." I sighed. "You've already finished 9 other drawings. I let you stay up because you were excited, but it's long past time for bed. You two can finish Cinderella after you get back from school tomorrow." My stomach gave a guilty twinge. I'd never lied to Sarah before, but I had no intention of Frank and Teddy still being there by the time she got back home from school the next day. "But Dad, Sarah's next excuse was cut short by a yawn. This seemed to signify that I had won the argument, and so, reluctantly, she packed her crayons back into the box and trudged upstairs to change for bed. I watched her back disappear at the top landing. I then looked back down at Frank and Teddy, who was giving Cinderella an extra pair of insectoid eyes. He must have sensed my gaze, because he turned around and looked at me. "Can you teach me how to sleep?" he asked. Not tonight," I said. but I desire to learn this human function. In return, I shall teach you how to summon a nightmare creature from the eternal realms of sorrow." I shook my head. "Frank and Teddy, I really don't need to know how to do that. Besides, sleep isn't something that you can teach." "I am a good learner," he insisted. "It only took me an hour to learn how to breathe." "You had to learn how to breathe?" Frank and Teddy nodded. Seeing that he was only going to keep pestering me until I agreed, I relented. "Okay, there's really not that much to it. You just close your eyes, lay down, and let your mind relax. Some people count sheep." "I see," said Frank and Teddy. "Where do you keep the sheep?" "They're imaginary sheep." "Oh." Frank and Teddy closed his eyes and took a deep breath, then lowered himself onto the carpet. 1, 2, 3, 4. You count them silently. "I see. Very well." He laid on the floor for only 10 seconds more, before a huge snore like a broken garbage disposal erupted from his mouth. Wow, I guess you really are a quick learner. I went back upstairs to find Sarah in her room, already in her pajamas, with the covers up to her neck. The lights had all been turned off, except for the pink princess nightlight that she kept by her bed. I sat down on the other side of the mattress and smiled at her. "Did you brush your teeth?" I asked. "Yeah, Dad." "Good. Then give me a kiss." She sat up and kissed my forehead. "If you brush your teeth, then why does your breath stink?" I asked. "It doesn't stink," she protested. "Honey, it smells like dog breath, and a dog that doesn't brush its teeth at that." Sarah laughed and said, "Okay, fine." She slid off the edge of the bed and trundled off to the bathroom, where I heard the sink go on. She came back in and climbed under the covers, this time smelling like mint. "I'm still not sleepy." "I know, honey, but close your eyes anyway." Sarah closed her eyes, and within a minute she was lightly snoring. Her face relaxed and her little fists clutched around her teddy bear. I bent down and kissed her on the forehead before climbing back down the stairs and resuming my spot on the sofa. I grabbed a book off the shelf, resolving to stay awake until the following morning. I should have chosen a more interesting book, however, because soon I was asleep too. Welcome to hell. The next morning was bright and cheery. The birds were singing merrily and giving my very sleep-deprived self a major headache. I finished cooking breakfast, then went to wake Sarah up early for school. I sat down at the dining room table to our usual feasts of bacon, eggs, and iced orange juice. Frank and Teddy was still snoring on the living room floor. I looked at Sarah over my glasses, giving her what I hoped was a very stern and impressive look. "I'm gonna send you all to school today, like normal," I said. "And I want you to promise me that no matter what, you're not gonna say anything to any of your friends about the demonic teddy bear in our living room. Can you do that for me?" Sarah swallowed a mouthful of bacon. "Uh-huh." I held out my hand, pinky extended. "Pinky promise?" Sarah rolled her eyes and locked her pinky into mine. "I pinky promise." "Good. Dad?" "Yeah?" "Can I go wake up Frank and Teddy now?" "After you finish your breakfast." Sarah grinned and began to attack her plate with a ferocity I'd only ever seen before on the Discovery Channel. Soon she was finished and streaming into the living room. I watched as she awoke Frank and Teddy by jumping onto his belly. The bear sat up with a start, spilling Sarah off onto the floor. "Princess Sarah," he bellowed in alarm. "Are you injured?" "No, but I've got to go to school. You have to wait here until I get back." "As you command." Sarah stuck her hand out with her pinky extended. Pinky promise? The bear looked down at his own conspicuously fingerless paw. I don't have a pinky, he cried in dismay. Just regular promise then. I solemnly swear, he bellowed. Good, said Sarah, shrugging on her backpack. I walked to the front door and let her out, then walked down with her to the curb to wait for the bus. Soon, the little yellow school bus that ran the circuit to and from Sarah's kindergarten was pulling to a stop with a whine of old brakes. I tried landing a kiss on Sarah's head, but missed and hit her backpack as she bolted to the bus and through the open doors. I sighed wistfully as I watched her jog down the middle aisle and sit with her waiting friends. They really do grow up so fast. I returned to the house to find Frankenteddy had resumed last night's coloring, his massive paw clumsily curled around a crayon as he drew spiked spears and axes in the hands of Snow White and the 7 dwarves. I thought about saying something to him and decided it was a waste of time and dug the phone out of my pocket, hitting the redial button on the number that had placed me on hold all day yesterday. The line rang once and a familiar voice answered. Hell customer service. How may I help you today? This is Darren Rogers again. Oh, Mr. Rogers. How are Sarah and Frankenteddy getting along? They're getting along fine, but that's not really the point. I'm afraid I have to insist on returning him. He doesn't even belong on this planet, much less in my living room. I turned to see Frankenteddy standing behind me. My stomach dropped as he glared at me. I stammered, grasping for an explanation. I didn't mean you. I was talking about the, pet hamster. If the hamster is a threat to Sarah's safety, then I shall terminate it. Please don't do that. That is preferable, Frankenteddy bellowed. I find the hamster to be cute. I do not wish to destroy it. I could feel my mouth hanging wide open again. Okay? Mr. Rogers? The receptionist's stern voice came through the headset. Yeah? If you really insist that there's a problem with the teddy bear, I might be able to help you. Really? I asked, daring to hope. How's that? Satan had a last-minute cancellation. I can squeeze you in for an appointment today instead. I said, breathing out with an odd mixture of relief and dread. That would be great. When's the appointment? Now, she replied. I'll go ahead and buzz you 3 down. Down? What do you mean, down? I didn't get an answer, though. Instead, a column of black and purple flames erupted around me. My living room dissolved into darkness, and I felt an intense pressure all around me like I was being sucked through a straw. Hot, sulfur-scented air rushed past me as I fell into the darkness, until finally I landed with a thud on something soft. Looking down, I saw that it was a cushy office chair. As I looked to the left and right, I saw empty office chairs on either side of me. A moment later, Sarah and Frankenteddy had fallen into them from above. Judging by our surroundings, we were in some sort of cave. The walls were carved of rough brown stone that radiated shimmering heat. In the far back corner of the cave sat an enormous blue-scaled dragon head. Sarah was staring around with the same look of wonder on her face she'd had when I had first taken her to Disneyland. At the opposite end of the room, there was a large black desk of polished obsidian, behind which sat a high-backed leather office chair. I didn't have to wonder where Satan was for very long, because a puff of black and purple flames materialized behind the desk. And when the flames and smoke had vanished, he was sitting in his chair smiling at us as if we were having Sunday tea. Satan's skin was bright red, and he wore a silk black suit with dull gray pinstripes. He had 2 smallish black horns and a neatly trimmed goatee "So," he said, "welcome to hell." He beamed around at all of us, but the room remained silent. "Ahem," he went on. "I don't get many visitors down here, besides the inmates, I mean." I saw out of the corner of my eye that Sarah had crawled into the dragonhead's mouth with Frank and Teddy, and they had begun having a tea party. I wondered where they had gotten the teacups. "Sarah, I don't think that you should." "Don't worry, Darren," Satan cut me off. "The dragon is mostly dead." "Mostly?" Satan ignored my question. "As I understand it," he said, threading his fingers together and setting his hands on the desk, "you have some problem with Frank and Teddy?" I heard the jingling of china as Frank and Teddy set his teacup down. "You told me the problem was with the hamster, Darren." I am sorry for my outburst," Frank and Teddy bellowed. "I have not eaten today. You have run out of Cheetos." "You had 30 bags," I protested rather weakly. I looked to Satan for confirmation that this was an absurd amount, but he was buzzing the intercom button on his office phone. "Tina?" "Yes, Mr. Satan," replied the same voice from the customer service helpline. "Can you get Frank and Teddy 200 pounds of Cheetos?" 300 pounds, Frank and Teddy interjected. 300 pounds of Cheetos? Satan corrected. "Right away, Mr. Satan." "Thank you," Frank and Teddy roared. "I require the proper amount of fuel to sustain my full satanic power." Immediately, the door to the office burst open and a giant, blue-skinned demon with bulging muscles and a hatchet sticking out of his head pushed in a giant wheelbarrow full of Cheetos. "We make them down here," Satan said, grinning. "Now, Mr. Rogers, what issue is it that you have with Frank and Teddy?" "Well, just look at him. He's a monster." The room collectively gasped. "We try not to use that word down here, Darren," Satan chided. He turned to the blue-skinned demon. "I apologize for that, Jerry. He's from Earth." The blue-skinned demon shot me a nasty look, while I once again tried and failed to make noises with my mouth. He huffed through his giant, bowl-like nostrils before stalking out of the room. Satan turned back to me and put on a patronizing smile. "I'm surprised at you for judging Frank and Teddy by his appearance. You know, my own daughter is cute as a button, but she's the one who put the hatchet in Jerry's head." "You have a daughter?" I asked. "I have 700. Oh, well, Sarah is my only daughter, and I can't help but worry about her when there's a giant, undead teddy bear thing hanging around." I heard giggling and turned to see that Sarah had climbed onto the back of Frank and Teddy's head, and he was pretending to not know where she was. "I have been taken in by your deception. I am not aware that you are on the back of my head." Satan leaned over on his desk, rested his chin on interlocked fingers, and put on an unconvincing expression of empathy. "I think I know what you mean," he said. "I know just what to do." "You do? Oh, thank God. Satan." Satan waved his hand dismissively and pushed a button on the intercom. "Tina?" "Yes, Mr. Satan," the intercom replied. "Can you please send in Miss Hatchetface?" "Yes, Mr. Satan." "Miss Hatchetface?" I said, unsure. "You mean that giant blue a demon was a woman?" "You mean Jerry? No, Miss Hatchetface is my personal nanny. I'm going to send her back up to Earth with you to look after your daughter and Frank and Teddy." "But No need to thank me," Satan said, grinning in modest appreciation of his own generosity. "It's all part of what I do. You're going to love Miss Hatchetface. She did a great job with my kids. Well, not the first few hundred, but she got the hang of it eventually." "Satan, The knock that interrupted me nearly knocked the door off with the hinges. "Oh, that'll be Miss Hatchetface now." Satan grinned, rubbing his hands together. "You guys are going to get along great, Darren. I'm sure of it." I didn't know what to say, and so I simply slumped my shoulders and mumbled out a subdued, "Okay." Satan sprang up and opened the door, and Miss Hatchetface came in. I gasped when I saw her. For the first time since Sarah had written to Satan, my sudden surprise was pleasant. Miss Hatchetface was the most beautiful creature I'd ever laid eyes on. She was petite and pink-skinned, with a small button nose and glittering obsidian eyes. Her black hair shone like silk, lightly brushing the tops of her shoulders as she turned her head towards me. "Are you Mr. Rogers?" she asked. Satan leaned over and whispered, "She's half succubus," in my ear, as I shook her soft, delicate hand. I said. Miss Hatchetface's slender pink tail twitched as she giggled. "I've never met a human before. Are they all as handsome as you?" My mouth went dry, and I suddenly became very aware of how large and awkward my tongue was. "So," Satan clapped his hands together cheerily, "are we all set here then?" I stared into Miss Hatchetface's dark black eyes, and before I knew what was happening, my head was nodding up and down of its own accord. "Great," Satan said. "Now come on, I'll give you all a tour of the offices before I send you back up." "Offices? You mean you run a company down here?" "Oh, sure," said Satan. "A Helicorp is one of the largest, multi-dimensional corporations in existence. Come on, I'll show you to Daryl's department. We've got a new project out of there. Top secret, you know." "Well, if it's top secret, why are you showing me?" "Because I trust you, Darren," he replied. "Also, Hell's implicit, non-disclosure agreement states that if you attempt to reveal company secrets to anyone, your head will explode in spectacular fashion." My heart sank down to my stomach. Maybe I can do without knowing about this project. Satan waved his hand dismissively. "Nonsense. It's really interesting. You'll love it." He buzzed the intercom again. "Tina?" "Yes, Mr. Satan." "Can you send in Jerry to show Darren and Miss Hatchetface to Daryl's department?" "Yes, Mr. Satan." The hulking blue-skinned demon stomped into the room again. "Come, tiny human," he said in a thick voice that brooked no argument. Hold on a second, Satan. You said Miss Hatchetface and me. What about Sarah and Frank and Teddy?" "Come on, Darren," said Satan. "Do you really want to expose your daughter to the horrors of Hellcorp? She'll be much happier in here with me and with Frank and Teddy." On the one hand, I had to admit that he was probably right. Sarah probably was safer in his office, but he had a sly look in his eyes that I didn't quite trust. It felt like he wanted to get rid of me for some reason. "I'm not really sure. Just relax," came a soft voice in my ear. I turned to see Miss Hatchetface smiling placidly. She set her hand gently on my shoulder, and I felt a shivering warmth spread from her touch throughout the rest of my body. My head began to swim in a pleasant fog. Okay," I said. "Let's go." Miss Hatchetface took me by the arm and led me down a dim, torchlit corridor, following Jerry as he stomped along ahead of us. The rough stone walls of the hallway were so hot that little droplets of molten stone were rolling down the sides, smoking and sizzling as they landed on the earthen floor. At the end of the corridor was a colossal stone doorway with a heavy brass ring for a knob. "This is Daryl's department," said Jerry, huffing out his bowl-like nostrils. He put his shoulder to the door and slowly wedged it open, with a horrible sound of stone grinding on stone. The room inside looked like any other office building. Rows of cubicles were crowded together tightly under flickering fluorescent lights, and demons of all manner of strange appearances sat typing at box-monitored computers that looked at least 20 years old. There were huge reptilian demons with rocky gray scales and thick, sinewy tails that thudded against the linoleum floor as they typed. Colossal bear demons that shuffled around in suits, glaring at their subordinates. And small, bat-like demons with simian faces and vampiric teeth that whizzed above our heads, delivering files from one desk to another. A short and fat reptilian demon with a balding head and gold-rimmed spectacles bustled up to us. "Just what in the hell do you think you're doing, Jerry?" "Satan wants to give this meat sack a tour of the office," said Jerry. Daryl peered over his glasses at me and squinted his eyes before turning back to Jerry. "A tour of an office? Send the poor man to a factory. It'll be just as boring, and he won't interrupt our work." "Nothing I can do," said Jerry. "Satan's orders. I'll be outside." Jerry gave me a withering look before turning around and lumbering out of the office. The stone door slid behind him and closed with a resounding thud. Daryl stared at the two of us for a moment, threw his hands up in resignation, and said, "All right then, come with me." He turned around and beckoned for us to follow him down a row of cubicles. "This is where we handle the bulk of Hellcorp's business. It's not terribly exciting, I'm afraid, mostly just paperwork regarding interdimensional soul commerce." "I'm sorry, did you say soul commerce?" "Oh, sure," said Daryl. "We get a steady supply from Earth for free, so selling them to other dimensions is pure profit." I ducked out of the way as a leathery black file demon whizzed by my head. "So who buys the souls?" "Various cosmic entities," he replied, taking a moment to smack a sleeping employee on the back of the head with his clipboard. "Well, what do they do with them?" Daryl shrugged. "Not my department. Yeah, I'm afraid it's not too glamorous, but it does have its perks. We've got an excellent medical plan, for instance." "Really?" "Oh, sure. We can stop by the company doctor if you want. Just tell them if any of your organs are bothering you, and they'll remove them free of charge. Though I'm afraid anesthesia is extra." No thanks. I need all of my organs to live." "Really? I'd stay away from the office shredder then. It's terribly aggressive." Thanks for the tip." We arrived at the end of the long row of cubicles to find a normal-looking white office door. There was a brown plastic plaque on the side that read, "Top Secret Project." "All right," said Daryl, hand on the knob. "Are you ready to have your mind blown?" "No, not really." "That's the spirit," he said, pushing the door open. When I saw what was inside, my mind was more muddled than blown. There was a crowd of about 20 normal people in business suits, casually milling around and not doing much of anything. Daryl let out a long, contented sigh. They're magnificent, aren't they?" That depends. What are they?" Daryl turned to me, and for the first time since I'd met him, he was smiling, with a mischievous gleam in his eye. "What do you think they are?" he asked. "I don't know. They just look like regular people to me." "Ha ha!" shouted Daryl, smacking his knee with his clipboard. "Exactly. They look like regular people." "Well, what are they then?" I asked. Daryl waved the two of us inside and walked us around the room. Once I got a closer look at the people milling around, I realized there was something slightly off about the lot of them. Their eyes were all just a bit too wide, and they all wore broad smiles for no perceivable reason. "One of my more brilliant ideas," said Daryl. "As you probably know, we own about 99% of all souls in Washington, D.C. "You do?" "Of course. And politician souls go for 3 times the price of regular ones." "Oh, I think I get it. You're going to take these people and turn them into politicians." "You're almost right," said Daryl. "See, what we do
is wait for the ones whose souls we own rise to power, and then BAM! We swap them out with an exact copy. And since we already have claim to the politician's soul anyway, we just bring them down to hell a little early. But don't the people who know them notice something's off? Daryl chuckled and shook his head. Maybe they would if we were replacing regular people, but these are politicians. Nobody can tell the difference. He looked down at his watch, an ostentatious gold Rolex with a tight leather band that dug into the fat of his wrist. Well, that should do it. Why don't I take you back to the hallway, and Jerry can get you back to Satan's office? I was starting to get a headache from the harsh fluorescent lights, and so I readily agreed. Daryl led us out of the top-secret project room and back down the row of cubicles. He rapped on the big stone door of the office and yelled, "Jerry, I'm done with this lot. You can take him back to Satan now." I heard Jerry grunt in affirmation, and the door slowly slid back open. We followed him back down the torchlit corridor to Satan's office. He pushed the door open and we strolled in to see Sarah and Satan hunched over the huge obsidian desk, discussing something in low tones while Frankenteddy crammed his face with Cheetos in the corner. When Satan saw us enter, he hastily leaned back in his chair and straightened his tie. Back a little early, aren't you, Darren? How about that secret project? Pretty cool, huh? Yeah, I guess. What were you two just talking about? Sarah was just asking me some questions about hell. A healthy curiosity on this one. She'll grow to be a scientist. Anyway, I've got some important business matters to attend to, so I'll go ahead and send you four back up to Earth. Before I could object, Satan had pressed a little purple button on his desk, and the four of us were shooting through a tube of purple flames back to my living room. One more satanic gift. I arrived back home in a rush of acrid smoke, hitting the living room floor hard on all fours. Miss Hatchetface gracefully alighted next to me, and Frankenteddy and Sarah landed across the room in the armchair, with Sarah on Frankenteddy's lap. I turned towards Sarah. "You know, if you don't tell me what you and Satan were talking about, I'm gonna have to ground you," I said. "I can't, Daddy," Sarah giggled. "It's top secret." I sighed, scooped myself up, and shuffled over to the couch, collapsing in a boneless puddle of exhaustion. It was only a brief moment of respite, however, before there was a loud pounding at the front door. Miss Hatchetface opened the door with a bubbly, "Hi," but nobody was on the stoop. She bent over and picked 2 envelopes up off the porch. She folded one up and slid it into her pocket before she turned around and carried the other one to me. "Mr. Rogers, you've gotten another letter from Satan." She handed me the envelope. Thanks." I hesitated as I stared down at the envelope in my hands. It was just one letter then? Nothing else? "Nope," she replied. "Only one letter." I wondered why she was lying to me, but the thought was soon driven from my mind by the contents of my own envelope. "Dear Dan, your name is Dan, right? I'm afraid I'm really not good with names. I'm just going to assume that it's Dan, and if it's not, you can correct me the next time you're in hell. Anyway, the reason I'm writing isn't to ask you your name, but to let you know that I went ahead and took care of your little Frankenteddy problem. The solution is scheduled to be delivered shortly after this letter. Yours truly, Satan." Heavy dread pervaded my body. After all, my current experience with Satan's solutions to problems had not left me optimistic in regards to what he considered reasonable. My mood only worsened when I saw a large moving van pull to a stop in front of my home. I was still feeling a little woozy from breathing the sulfur and ash-laced air of hell, and so I asked Miss Hatchetface to check it for me. She went outside to the truck and came back hauling a giant wooden crate that must have been 10 times her size, dropping it unceremoniously outside of the front door. "How did we get it in?" she asked me. I slowly shook my head. "Try the garage?" "Oh, that's a good idea," she said, hauling the crate up as if it were full of feathers and carrying it towards the garage. A few moments later, I heard the sound of grinding metal coming from the garage, and I quickly found my feet and rushed outside. I saw Miss Hatchetface shoving the garage door up with her bare hands, folding the metal up like it was paper. She threw it into the open position and stood grinning with her arms crossed, admiring her handiwork. "Wow, that door was pretty heavy. Humans must be stronger than you look." There's a garage door opener," I replied. "A what?" Never mind." "Okay, we'd better get this crate inside and crack it open." My urge to be a gentleman and help her lift the crate was not quite as powerful as my urge to avoid a hernia, so I opted to let her move it inside herself. When we had gotten it inside, she grabbed hold of one of the wooden sides and wrenched it off with such force that it flew across the garage and smashed through the driver's side window of my car. "Oops. Sometimes I don't know my own strength. Hercules is a distant ancestor." "It's fine," I replied, though it clearly wasn't. Before I was able to get too upset about the car window, my breath was taken away by the contents of the crate. "Is that what I think it is?" I asked. "Oh, it sure is," she replied. "Wow, Satan must really like you. These are rare." Inside the box was a tangled mess of black branches and dark purple leaves. The leaves twisted around in little conical spirals, and at the center of each spiral rested a large, orange, pinecone-shaped fruit. Upon closer inspection, I could see that each individual fruit was a conglomerate of dozens of Cheetos. I reached out and snapped off one of the Cheeto fruit, and a new one instantly sprouted in its place. "So it's a Cheeto tree." "Yeah." "Well, all right then." I turned around to head back inside when I saw Sarah and Frankenteddy ambling down the sidewalk, hand in paw. Hey," I shouted after them. They either didn't hear or didn't care, however, as they kept right on walking. The last thing I wanted to do was to explain to the homeowners association why I was keeping demons in my home, and so I sprinted after them, determined to get them back inside before the neighbors saw. By the time I managed to get in front of them, I was out of breath and panting. I leaned over with my hands on my knees as I tried to explain why it wasn't a good idea for Frankenteddy to be wandering around the neighborhood. Where, a giant teddy bear, neighbors, was all I managed to gasp out. "I think he means you should go back inside so that the neighbors don't see you," I heard Miss Hatchetface say from behind me. I nodded my head in vigorous agreement. "I cannot abandon my charge to the wild dangers of the suburban neighborhood," Frankenteddy boomed. "I shall accompany her on her quest, no matter the danger, and together we shall go to the park and catch butterflies." Sarah looked up at Frankenteddy and laughed. "They're called butterflies." "Butterflies," Frankenteddy bellowed. "That does not make sense. Are they flies made of butter?" Sarah giggled and didn't respond. "I think I have a solution," said Miss Hatchetface. "Let's head back to the house and I'll make up a disguise for you. Then you two can go to the park together." "That is acceptable," said Frankenteddy, "but it must be fearsome." "Of course," said Miss Hatchetface. She turned to me. "Mr. Rogers, are you okay?" I was still too out of breath to answer, so I simply gave her a thumbs up in response. A little wrinkle appeared in the middle of her brow. "Are you sure you're okay? Maybe it's better if I carry you back." Without waiting for a response, she put one arm around my neck and swept my knees out from under me with the other. My head bumped gently against her shoulder as she carried me back to the house. She smelled faintly of cinnamon and sandalwood. When we got back inside,
Sarah and Frank and Teddy ran to play upstairs, and Miss Hatchetface set me down on the sofa. "You just rest a while," she said, smiling down at me. "I think I saw something upstairs that would make a good disguise for Frank and Teddy." "Yeah, okay," I replied. I'll be here, regretting my life decisions." I watched as Miss Hatchetface climbed the staircase. She paused at the top, and I quickly pretended to look elsewhere as she turned to look at me. She laughed and continued on upstairs. "Smooth, Darren. Smooth." I reached for the remote and turned on the television. There was an infomercial on about some sort of bacon coat rack-looking contraption that you could stick in the microwave. The overenthusiastic spokesman was yelling into the camera about how it could revolutionize your morning breakfast routine. I closed my eyes and tuned it out, and before long, the exhaustion of the day and the monotonous drone of infomercials took its toll, and I found myself drifting off to sleep. It wasn't long, however, before I was awakened by Sarah, who had seized my arm and was shaking it violently. "Daddy, look!" she squealed. I looked. Frank and Teddy had been draped in a giant mess of fabric that did in fact seem to disguise the fact that he was a giant demon teddy bear. The costume, however, was anything but fearsome. It was bright pink and covered in a unicorn pattern, with a lace at the bottom that brushed the floor whenever he moved. I turned to Miss Hatchetface. "Are those Sarah's curtains?" I asked. "Yeah," Sarah shouted. "Cool, right?" "Is it fearsome?" Frank and Teddy boomed. "Yeah, sure," I replied. I looked at Miss Hatchetface. "But why did you have to use the curtains?" I asked. Miss Hatchetface shrugged. "They were the only thing that was big enough," she replied. "Okay. May we go to the park now and exterminate the flies of butter?" "We're not going to exterminate them. We're going to catch them," said Sarah. "I make no promises." I pushed myself into a sitting position. "Yeah, you can go to the park and catch butterflies, but I'm coming along as well." "Yay!" Sarah exclaimed. "I am also excited," added Frank and Teddy. "Miss Hatchetface?" I asked. "Sure. Let me just grab some Cheeto fruit for Frank and Teddy." Frank and Teddy's mouth fell open into a perfect O, and his eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. "You have Cheeto fruit?" "Oh, yeah. Satan sent over a tree." "I am exceedingly pleased by this information," he roared. "Let us feast on the delicious fruit of Cheeto until our satanic appetites are sated." Reluctantly, I rolled my tired body off the couch, and we all headed out to the garage. Frank and Teddy found a box of trash bags and filled 2 of them with Cheeto fruit, and was visibly disappointed when he realized that they would not fit with us in the car. I tried and failed to avoid nicking my hand as I brushed the broken glass out of the driver's seat. We all got in, and I pulled out into the road and began driving to the park. About 1 minute into the drive, Frank and Teddy startled me by yelling my name from the back seat. "Lord Rogers." "Lord, you can just call me Mr. Rogers, Frank and Teddy." "That is a negative. Sarah has informed me that she is a princess. Therefore, you must be a lord." "Okay, Frank and Teddy, what is it?" "I wish to commend you on your mastery of this fearsome metal beast. You ride with the skill of a battle-hardened torque spearer in Satan's cavalry." "Fearsome metal beast? You mean the car?" Frank and Teddy turned to Sarah. "Do I mean the car?" he asked. "Yeah, you mean the car." He turned back to me. "Yes, I mean the car." "Right, I got that. Thank you, Frank and Teddy." "You are very welcome." I watched Frank and Teddy in the mirror as he stared out of my broken window. Suddenly, he turned to his own window and smashed a humongous furry paw right through it. The tires squealed as I slammed on the brakes. I slammed against my seatbelt as the car jerked to a stop. "What on earth are you doing?" I demanded. "I wish to feel the breeze, so I opened the window." "There's a button for that, you know." "A what?" I sighed and rubbed my temples. "Never mind." "Very well, Lord Rogers." I sighed again and put the car back in drive, and 5 minutes later, we were pulling up the road to the park. Little did I know that disaster was about to strike. Kerfuffle in the park. A crisp autumn breeze blew the newly turning leaves around the grounds of the park. Frank and Teddy and Sarah dashed around the sprawling green lawn of waving neon pink butterfly nets as Miss Hatchetface and I sat on a bench and watched. After a few minutes of watching the two of them miserably fail at catching butterflies, Miss Hatchetface turned to me and smiled. "So, Mr. Rogers," she began, "is there a Mrs. Rogers in your life at all?" My tongue began to feel cumbersome and clumsy, as it always did when Miss Hatchetface looked at me the way she was looking at me now, or any way at all, really. No, not anymore," I managed to choke out. "Really?" Miss Hatchetface cocked her head to the side. "What happened?" "She, ran off shortly after Sarah was born." "Oh my," Miss Hatchetface frowned. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to bring up a bad memory." "No, it's okay, you didn't know." "Let's change the subject," she said, trying to sound cheery. "What do you do for a living?" "I'm a writer." "Oh, really? That's neat. I always wanted to write a book, but I never got around to it." "Yeah, and I always wanted to write a good book, and I'm still trying to get around to it." Miss Hatchetface laughed. "What about you? I heard you were Satan's nanny. That must have been an interesting job." "It was certainly a handful," laughed Miss Hatchetface. "Satan's daughters all tend to take after their fathers, so they can be quite the mischievous little bunch. I remember one time I took little Sophie to see the dinosaurs on Earth. She accidentally stepped in a pile of dinosaur, well, you know, in her brand new princess shoes, and she was so upset that she grabbed a comet from space and smashed it right into the nearest dinosaur. Of course, she overdid it a bit, and that was the end of the big lizards." Miss Hatchetface covered her mouth and giggled. "The poor thing was grounded for a month after that." "Wow, that's, cute, isn't it?" laughed Miss Hatchetface, giving me a playful punch on the shoulder that nearly knocked me off the bench. Knowing from my rather inextensive experience with women that hitting was supposed to be a good sign, I desperately racked my brain for another topic of conversation to keep the happy mood going. But before I could come up with one, we were interrupted by a scream, coming from the direction where Frank and Teddy and Sarah were playing. We both jumped to our feet and rushed towards Sarah to see her sitting on the ground and sobbing while Josh, a notorious neighborhood tormentor of insects and small children, was pulling the wings off her butterflies and laughing. Before I could even open my mouth to admonish Josh, a huge pink blur whizzed by me, and Frank and Teddy had scooped the boy off the ground by the back of his shirt and began roaring at him in his deafening baritone. "You are not permitted to harm the Princess Sarah's flies of butter," he yelled, so loudly that Josh covered his ears with his hands. "You will apologize to the Princess Sarah, and then I shall send you to hell forthwith, so that you may be judged for your transgressions." "Please, God, no," Josh shouted. "God will not save you from the Dark Lord Satan." Sarah reached up and gently tugged on Frank and Teddy's paw and said,
It's okay, Frank and Teddy. He's not worth our time. Just let him go.
Frank and Teddy dropped Josh into a sobbing heap, and the boy wasted no time in sprinting out of the park, as fast as his legs could carry him, while Frank and Teddy shouted after him, "Be warned, tiny human. The judgment in hell will not be so lenient." Sarah stared down at the dead butterflies, tears moistening the edges of her eyes. "There is no greater honor than to die in battle," he said as gently as his giant voice would allow.
"Yeah, I guess so,"
Sarah replied, sounding unconvinced. "I believe that I have detected insincerity in your voice," said Frank and Teddy. "Allow me to rectify the situation." He bent down and picked the dead butterflies up in his enormous paws. As he held them in his upturned palms, a cloud of dark smoke began to swirl around them. And then, miraculously, they began to fly again.
"Wow, Frank and Teddy,"
Sarah squealed.
"You brought them back to life."
"I have merely endowed them with the power of Satan," he replied. As I watched Sarah and Frank and Teddy playing with the newly revived butterflies, I realized that maybe I'd been wrong to judge him based on the way he looked, and I realized that maybe he wasn't so bad after all. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, he could be exactly what Sarah needed after her mom had disappeared. Then the butterflies started breathing fire,